I'll start. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session. My name is Josh, and I have my friend Savitch. I'm from Accenture. We are from Australia. We're going to talk about a really interesting project that we've been doing. In that project, we integrate Drupal with Salesforce. All right, let's start the presentation then. We're going to divide the presentation into 4 sections. At first, we're going to talk about the requirements and give you some context about this project. And secondly, we're going to talk about the selected solution by the client. And then most importantly, we're going to talk about the integration between Salesforce and Drupal. Then we will have some lesson or key point that we can point out from this project. Then we can answer some questions. All right, I'll give you some context about this project. Our client is a large-scale Australian government agency. Our client is taking care of Australian citizens' safety at workplace, which means that they have multiple platforms and they hold a large number of private information in their system. They are in the journey of digital transformation, and what they want is really they want to improve their user experience across multiple platforms so that the user won't feel different when they jump in between the platforms. And they want a better understanding of their customer information so that they can actually leverage from the data learning to find out if there's any workplace hazard or there's any risk at workplace that they can actually send their alerts. Then, of course, they want some personalization in their website. They can distribute some personalized content accordingly based on the user profile. And then in future, if they want to add more subsites into the website, they should be able to do that with minimum dev effort. All right. Accenture has been chosen by the client to actually experience the journey of the digital transformation. The client had a chosen solution under the Australian government digital standard, which is a fully decoupled solution. Accenture has been auditing the solution and doing a plan for the future integration between Drupal and Salesforce. Also, how do we better maintain the solution? Here is the overall architecture. Of course, we're using fully decoupled Drupal, and we're using Vue.js and Salesforce as other components in this diagram. I'll just give you a brief. Salesforce Community, we can understand that is the Salesforce frontend. And we have multiple Vue.js frontend behave like the website frontend. Then Salesforce CRM is the backend CRM system. Of course, we have Drupal, behave like a content API and content repo. When a user trying to log in either from the Salesforce frontend or Drupal frontend, the authentication happens via RESTful between the frontend and the Salesforce CRM. Of course, Drupal's RESTful API distribute the content to the frontend. Some detail view about how Drupal distribute the content. We have 2 Vue.js frontend websites hosting in Node.js server. Then we have 1 mobile native app to actually consuming the content from Drupal. Then we have Salesforce frontend consuming the content also from Drupal repository. Well, normally there's a common question when you implementing a fully decoupled architecture is how do you actually tell the frontend which content you can consume from Drupal? Because we assume we can't really get the content ID, the entity ID directly. Frontend have no idea which is the ID to consume. That's why that assume everyone is using decoupled router module. This module is actually doing the alias translation and redirect translation. A small second diagram I draw here to pretty much explain how it works. Like when your frontend is actually making a content query, Drupal decoupled router module receive the request, then it's trying to actually reach out to the redirect list and alias list within Drupal and trying to find out the mapping entity ID. Then eventually it will just pass the query, the entity ID to JSON API, and JSON API will just return the entity content. So in this way, our front end doesn't really care about what is your node ID, what is your user ID or any ID. All we know is, okay, I want to know the content from this nice URL. You just need to give me the content or give me the 404. And we use JSON API. It was a long history. The client used JSON API before JSON API was brought in core. Then we did a really nice job, a really hard job to actually migrate the country module JSON API into the core module. One thing that we need to point out is that to be able to minimize the number of calls from the front end to the backend, for example, if the user is using paragraph module and using entity reference field within the paragraph module, there will be multiple calls from the front end in order to actually get the full page details. We try to minimize that number of calls from the browser to the web server. In this way, we are using the JSON API extra module to actually inject the process, which I'm drawing here in the diagram, to actually find out all the referenced entities and, well, recursively, and compose one big JSON payload with all the nested entity and back to the front end. So that front end actually can get all the reference content in one go. For the form solution, at the moment, we don't really have a requirement to actually post a form submission directly to Salesforce. So that we actually use a really typical way of the web form API module to expose the web form information to frontend, and frontend can actually compose a form based on that, then submit the submission into Drupal. At the moment, Drupal is storing that. But I do really see the possibility that in the future, we are required to actually post the submission directly to Salesforce, because that's the CRM, that's where the submission should go. Pretty much, this solution is supporting on two further options. Number one is we use a web form handler to actually have the custom handler and post a submission from Drupal to Salesforce, or we have frontend directly posting the submissions to Salesforce to skip Drupal. Search solution. At the moment, we don't really have a requirement to actually search between the platforms. Means that we only have a requirement from the Vue.js website frontend to search content. But the tricky part is that we are using Acquia Solar, which doesn't really expose the search endpoint directly, so that we have to build a mechanism that the Vue.js actually posts the search request to Drupal, and Drupal interprets the search query, then use the search API to actually get the search result from Solar and return a customized JSON payload directly to the front end. We're using this mechanism in two ways. One is the search result pages, two is the listing pages. They all have the ability to support the facet search. Right. We do have the requirements to support one-page app. And we need to give the content author the flexibility to be able to drag and drop the different components within the page. So the way that we do it is that we created a custom paragraph type. And within that type, we use custom code to actually embed particular block into the paragraph, so that a content author can drop in unlimited number of blocks within the page. And each block will have a field called reference ID, which referencing to a application ID. Our frontend understands what is that ID for. So when our frontend requesting the content from Drupal, Drupal will tell, okay, these are the components that you need to render in this order, so that our frontend can actually render the one-page app in a really flexible way. Now I'll pass to my friend Yavish to talk about details.
Thanks, Josh. As I mentioned, as Josh mentioned, the programmatic blocks is pretty much a custom block that can be inserted into any node. And it also works well with the other paragraphs that you have on the page. So when frontend renders the page, when it gets the JSON API response, after flattening all the blocks, we can easily get the programmatic block app reference ID in front end. So what we've done here is, if you see on the right bottom section, we have a dynamic Vue.js component, and we also have a block map, which we map the reference ID with the actual um, the mounting point of the app, um, and even custom properties, as you can see in the computed section down there, can be added, where you can pass custom specific props to that app through programmatically. Um, there also another reason why we implemented the programmatic blocks is also in Drupal we can get a section where we can see all our microsites or all our micro apps in one place. So the content admin doesn't have to re-add the parameters of the app in every page. Moving on to the next slide, um, let's talk about the integration between Drupal and Salesforce. So if we let's go to the next slide. So before we actually begin, I just want to give a rough flow diagram of how the current front end websites are working with Drupal. So as you can see, we've got a bunch of Nuxt server-side rendered universal apps that are running on Node.js backend. These applications use an independent component library, because since we have to maintain the same styles and same design elements between multiple websites, we've built a single source for all our components. And this component library actually is a storybook app. And why pipelines, what we've done is when we publish this component library, it publishes it on npm, as well as it publishes a private GitHub page static site. Now this static site can be used by our content admins to pre-populate content before even adding it on the Drupal backend. So it gives a good idea for the content admins to um, visualize their components before they actually add it on the page. And talking about Drupal, um, obviously we've got a content API that connects via Cloudflare. So it also takes care of a lot of security issues as well as caching on the website. So moving on, let's dive a little bit into the Salesforce integration now that we've understood the actual front end of our existing website front end. So let me introduce this term called Salesforce Community. Now, Salesforce Community basically means it's just a front end system that Salesforce provides that can easily connect to the backend CRM element of Salesforce. So whenever we say Salesforce Community in this presentation, it just means the front end of Salesforce. Let's go through some really interesting use cases. So if we look at our first use case, next slide, Josh. So if we look at our first use case, so we've got two elements in Salesforce. One is the CRM, which is the backend, and community is the front end of Salesforce. Let's keep things very simple for now to understand. These two systems have front end components on them. Now these components can be, it can either be an Aura component or a Lightning Web component. Salesforce Apex being the backend language of Salesforce, which is sugar-coated Java and a mix of C#, and it's got its own syntax. It's a pretty interesting language. So what happens is these components, let's give an example. So let's say you've got a community website that has a sidebar menu. Now this menu is managed by the content admins. Now content admins may or may not have access to the company's CRM system because of confidentiality and access levels and so on and so forth. So let's say a menu in Drupal is managed and the menu is accessible via an API call. If our community website had a header on it, and if that header had to consume the menu from Drupal, all it would do is we would just make an async request from Salesforce Apex, which then requests the endpoint uh, from Drupal. And Drupal then in turn returns the content back to the component. And we then simply hydrate the components just like any other component on front end. That's one example. Another example, let's say we've got a form and there are a bunch of, let's say not a bunch, there's like 2,000 industries, and each industry has a code associated with it. And these codes have to be used for tagging or any XYZ purposes on these multiple websites. So we can create these as terms or in Drupal taxonomy terms. And again, the taxonomy API call can be made from Apex, and we can hydrate the elements, the components for Salesforce. Let's move on to the next use case, which is the most interesting one. So this is something, let me give you an example before I can actually explain the flow of what we're trying to do. So imagine you have an account on Facebook and you visit any other website on the web, which has a little like button or a share button. Now, in most cases, it kind of remembers, like if you just hit like, it kind of has it knows that you're the one who's logged in to the Facebook. Now, let's put this into our use case. Let's say I've got an internal, there's multiple departments, there's internal users logged in, and these users happen to visit the public websites. Now, this website, let's say, let us give an option example of adding, favoriting a page or adding an item to your wish list. So if you have multiple websites, let's say I have an account on Salesforce, I'm logged into my community or CRM, and I have my own admin panel. And this in this admin panel, I want to flag certain articles on these other sister websites. So what happens is both websites use this private cross-domain app, which is pretty much a static website that runs JavaScript on it. And both community CRM as well as the other front-end elements can use, it's as simple as just adding a script tag. And once this script tag is added, the meta requests information can be exchanged between these websites securely. So what we're doing is, let's say a Salesforce user logs in, and we on that logged in event, we push this custom meta, let's say a user ID, to our cross domain app. Now, when the same user visits these other web apps, it can catch that meta request. And what we simply then do is use Salesforce API to pass that as a parameter for any request. It could be either a GET request or a POST request. The possibilities are endless. And the same thing can also be done to Drupal as well. So instead of connecting to the front end, we can connect it straight to Drupal backend as well. And Drupal backend could then fire the async request via Salesforce API. Usually they've, again, all this is done really securely. And Salesforce, we use auth for our API and API authentication. So it's mostly like a JWT auth flow where you have like a certificate on your Node.js server, and it makes the authentication requests. We have to write our own proxy API calls to make sure everything is secure. Moving on to the next case study, which is again really exciting as well. I've been hearing a lot about personalization in DrupalCon. There's so many topics that kind of touch on this, but let me um, kind of explain the Salesforce implementation side of it as well. So Salesforce has like an information studio, which is a part of their um, marketing offering. Um, Now, this is the system that actually tracks the user persona. Um, what happens is front end, let it be like a community Salesforce or a Nuxt website, XYZ, it could be anything. They both run, or everything runs, has the script of information, like just how we add analytics in the same way. There's a script that we add. And once the script is added, it is tracking progress via pixels or cookies and so on and so forth. So what we're doing is we actually make an API call request to Information Studio to check if there is any persona that is being tracking for that visitor. If yes, what we do is we actually passing those profile attributes to Drupal, which has like a filter API call, and it simply returns the content. So let's say we've got a custom node type called personalized content, and personalized content is associated with each node is associated with multiple taxonomies. These taxonomies could simply be used as a filter API call, and it will return the content back, and we use that to hydrate the component. So let me kind of give you a real world example on this. So let's move on to the next slide. So I've just put on a really easy something very easy to understand. So let's say if you have a restaurant and a user is vegetarian, and he goes to the homepage, he or she goes to the homepage and sees this big block of steak on the plate. So what could happen is we are actually spoiling the experience for a certain type of user. So what we can do is Salesforce Information Studio. I won't get into how it assigns the persona. There's multiple channels that are fed in, and it also tracks the user's search and checks, the list goes on and on. But for any reason, let's say the user visits the website and is a vegetarian. So what we could actually do is show the image down below on the right side, which says story, and you see the chef is chopping a nice vegetable. And I think also this user is interested in venues, whereas the person who eats is interested, is looking for drinks on the site and has can eat meat, has a completely different homepage. And this, of course, can be implemented on multiple applications talking to the same system. So let's move on to the next slide to see how the data is actually flowing. So let's say I've got a use case where I'm from Melbourne, vegetarian. Role is any role. It could be just a user or an anonymous user, registered user, logged in user. The list is endless. It's up to you to personalize those segments. So as soon as I'm logged into my community, Salesforce community, or my other front-end website, it kind of Interaction Studio sends us back the component that these are the attributes that the user is currently carrying. And as I mentioned before, we simply make an API call and hydrate the component if there's any personalized content. If not, it can always fall back to the default content that's set already. So yeah, this is just something that's really interesting that we actually did for in Salesforce community and Drupal and other websites with the mobile app. It's really interesting. And we are capturing persona and user meta from all these platforms. So it gives us a very good idea of what the user is actually looking for so that we can serve them better. Moving on to the next case study. Well, then the most important case study is the lessons learned, which my friend Josh will explain.
Thanks, Jeff. I just want to have one thing to add, that the prioritization solution that we were talking about, we were using that in our fully decoupled solution, but it's definitely possible to actually use that within a traditional Drupal solution. So that Drupal, either Drupal or the React component within the Drupal theme can actually make the call to actually get the prioritization, the personas. Then Drupal can decide which content to actually display in the theme layer. All right, the lesson learned. So that fully decoupled solution is not a new story. I assume a lot of people have been doing that. We figured that we need to actually educate our clients to understand that fully decoupled solution does not leverage from Drupal's layer builder or any layer related functions, so that content author cannot configure the columns number in Drupal because it's hard coded in our front end. And which is really good for adopting a design system. We adopt the Australian government standard design system in our project. And since that design system was composed by Vue.js components, we pretty much adopt the components straight away and make our improvement. Then we can contribute back to the public sector's design system. As I mentioned, that the nested paragraphs is causing a bit of complexity in logic and also time consuming when we actually solutioning the JSON API extra module, and configuration is time consuming as well. So we were thinking, since we are actually using fully decoupled solution, we will reduce the level of the paragraph module usage. So make it simplified or set a limit on the level of nested that people can use. Otherwise, in theory, there can be unlimited layer of nested entities. And we set up a dedicated role is recommended in any decoupled solution project, that this role need to have the understanding of how the whole architecture works when a tester raises a bug. So this role needs to be able to triage whether that's a backend problem or it's a front-end problem or it's a caching problem. And resource management is really important for us too, because as I mentioned that we have dedicated front-end team, we have Drupal team, we have Salesforce team, and we have native app team. They all need to understand each other's API and each other's endpoint. For example, React front-end team, Vue.js team need to understand which endpoint that they can actually consume from Drupal, and also front-end team from the Salesforce need to understand which endpoint is available, and hopefully that they can, the both front-end team in Salesforce and website, they can actually share some logic. And yeah, back to you.
Thanks, Josh. So we have been since we are working with a government agency, there are certain guidelines that state that we have to contribute back to the community. So that's a really great thing because it's given us an opportunity to contribute to the government design system, as well as certain patches or modules have to be we have to work on them before anyone else, and so we get an opportunity to actually contribute back to Drupal as well. And in the front end world, you've got so many open source libraries, npm. We are contributing and creating issues if we find any, and also suggesting workarounds in the community. So that's I'm really happy that as a programmer, I get to satisfy my open source contributions as well, working for the government.
Just a comment on this one, that Accenture is encouraging their developer to contribute back to the community. For example, in Drupal, if there's any patches that we use, we definitely need to contribute back, create the issue in the module issue queue, and attach the patches back to the Drupal.org. And our standard is try not to use custom module in our project. We try to reuse all the core modules and conjoint modules as much as possible to minimize the custom code level. All right, yeah, back to you.
So what's next? So what we're constantly improving our product, and obviously when it comes to web, there's emerging technologies and new things coming on a weekly basis. But as far as this project is concerned, there are two primary things. One is our front end. Now everyone knows that Vue 3 has just come out, and I am really waiting for Nuxt 3 to officially release. I checked, there is we just want to rewrite those some heavy components with composition API. So that would be really nice. And Nuxt 3 will obviously come supercharged with some new things. Can't wait to try it. Also, we are in the process of upgrading to Drupal 9 and changing a few things. I think Josh could give us some insights on Drupal 9, on the Drupal 9 upgrade, or what things to look out for. From what I've experienced is, certain modules that you're using are not supported in 9. So, we're kind of working on the fixes for that. And hopefully we should be able to contribute those fixes to those Drupal modules as well. Also storybook driven development. So with storybook, comes with a lot of features. Recently, what we've done is we've added accessibility as well as color blindness testing in Storybook. So we're constantly looking at improving our Storybook experience, as well as in the process of making the website public as well. And that will give everyone the opportunity to actually check it out, and also maybe use the component library for their own projects in the future. Really exciting stuff. So how does we as Accenture, how do we actually make a difference? So obviously the clients get access to a large pool. We've 400,000 odd employees in the company, and everyone comes with a lot of experience and expertise. So our clients obviously have access to this wide pool of industry professionals. Also, the kind of work that we're doing is high impact, because any changes that we make is going to impact the public. And when it comes to a large government project, lives can sometimes be dependent on a certain tool that you're working on. Obviously, security as a standard, our applications have to be really secure, and security comes to our mind first. Even if it's a given or not given from the client side, we may need to make sure our applications are really secure. What this ends up is we end up building trust with our clients. And I think that's the most important thing. And that gives me the kick personally, because my clients, they love me and they really want to work with me every day. So, and I'm sure they love working with Josh as well.
Yeah, we need to wrap up as soon.
With that being said, let's wrap our presentation and on to the questions.
Okay, I can read out the questions. One of the first questions that came in was, hi, is this presentation available? So would you be making this presentation available, people, to everybody? Josh
Yeah, we
and
should
Yav?
be able to do it. Yeah, we can make this presentation available.
All right, Dimitris, we
Yeah,
will be providing you with details of where the presentation can be accessed pretty soon.
yeah.
The next question is from Anja Shribinski. Can you recommend the available Drupal module suite, which is d.o/project/Salesforce, or do you use other forms of connecting to Salesforce?
So what we've done with this one is we're not actually using a module. We have made a custom module on front end that actually connects with the Salesforce API. So it all depends on what you're actually trying to connect Salesforce with and what sort of functions are you trying to perform. So in our use case, it involved us to use the Salesforce API very actively. And we used to do that using, you could make a Drupal module that could, expose like a REST controller, which can authenticate with Salesforce, or we can do it on Node.js. There's a lot of possibilities to connect with Salesforce. So it all depends on what you're trying to achieve. But happy to chat with you to understand how you use Salesforce and Drupal together, so that I can assist you with your question further.
Hopefully, Anja, you'll be able to connect with Yavish directly. The next question is from Christian Ziegler. He says, do you have experience in synchronizing Drupal commerce with Salesforce and it braces opportunities?
Yeah, so
I can answer this one. You want to answer this one, Yavish?
No, I was just gonna say that since we've got the API, there's the possibility is endless. You can from Drupal perform any function, connect to any custom object on Salesforce, and perform manipulation with that data within your CRM. But what we currently do is it needs to be a connected app, and the connected app will be the main entry point for your integration.
So talking about the commerce, Drupal commerce and Salesforce Commerce Cloud are actually competitors. So when we talk about Drupal commerce, that we will have to assess the options on which platform is better to actually suit for the client's requirements. And my understanding is that Salesforce apparently is more compatible to Salesforce Commerce Cloud. And at the moment, we don't really have the requirement for e-commerce requirements in our website. In future, when the requirements coming, we will definitely need to assess on the options on whether we introduce Drupal commerce in the website, or we're gonna actually leverage from Salesforce.
Yeah, I know for a fact that there are many projects that we work on that use Salesforce B2C and has a custom community website for that. So maybe that's an option worth exploring, but it all depends on what data from Drupal do you require in Salesforce.
Okay, I don't see any more questions now. Yavish, would you like to share the results of the poll?
Absolutely. I'm sharing the results as I speak. You should be able to.
Can everybody see the poll results now? Because I would not be able to.
I could just read them out. So I think the first questions, are you using Salesforce in your organization? 48%, it's interesting. 48% said yes, 48% said no, and 5% said planning to. Really interesting. And there's 21 votes on that.
Isn't this like 48 plus 48 plus 5 is not 100? What's happening?
Here we go. I think that it's changing. So I can see 45% yes, 50% no, and 5% planning to.
Yep.
So the 5%, if you want to reach out to us if you have any questions, happy to help you. Are you running Drupal 9 on production already? 57% said no, and 43% said yes, 21 votes.
Interesting.
Very interesting. With the choice of preference of front-end frameworks, we see 25% of the audience uses React, 20% Vue. That's pretty good. I think we was catching up. 10% Angular, none for others, and the rest are using no framework. So I believe you are using the jQuery that comes with the Drupal theme or some with the theme development. So very interesting results. Thanks everyone for listening in. We really appreciate your time.